Hello, everyone. I'm John Lynn, the founder and chief editor at Healthcare IT Today, and I'm excited to bring you another in our series of interviews with top leaders in health IT. Today's guest is Roger Lam. He's VP of Engineering at MBX Systems. Welcome, Roger.
Thank you for having me, John. It's very excited to be talking to you today.
Yeah, so I think you have some really interesting technology used in ways that I think many don't expect. But for those that don't know you, tell us a little bit about yourself and MBX Systems.
Sure. So like you said, I'm the VP of Engineering here at MBX, and I've been involved with designing a lot of different computing systems and medical product for over 16 years. And at MBX, we are a high-tech company that works with computing industry for the most part, and we deliver a lot of different solutions for many different vertical company, including medical. But we also do streaming like Netflix. We deliver product for Omnicell, BAE system, so many different type of industry. But for the most part, what we do here is that we take a hardware solution and we offer it up to customer that want to concentrate on their software or service solution, and we pair that up to launch their products. So I would like to say, we help people to build their products.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So we're going to talk about some technology that could be interesting in a lot of use cases in healthcare. But where are we at with computer vision in like smart hospitals? What can we do now? What are the top things it's being used for in healthcare? Give us an overview of computer vision.
Sure. So computer vision is a subset of artificial intelligence, as we all know, right? And what's interesting is that it kind of moved from this sci-fi thing where, these are all the possibility to now with more, it's really helping the industry. And, there is a lot of shortage of labor in the industry as a whole, right? And AI now is starting to help out in, especially the last 2 years, I think have definitely accelerated in the
Yeah.
pandemic, where a lot of the things are that automation, that assisting, like how do we get through many of these? So in the past, there are some already existing application, like scanning application with AI, right? Like where you're reducing some image noise. And so you can use computer vision and you can reduce some of the dosage by looking at the pattern. So now you can take much faster X-ray scan, right? Or MRI or CT scan. But it's gone way beyond that, where you actually putting kind of the brain, like I have one of the actually prototype in my back here, where we have a Corey system is what we call, where you have a computer vision, where you have a smart now. You're actually putting the AI on the edge to allow for like asset tracking, people tracking, things like that.
Mm.
So you can do like fall prevention, looking at patient safety monitoring, remote monitoring for people. Whereas before, because you need the actual person to be like waiting. So
Mm.
one of the application that we've seen used a lot in the last 2 years is for specifically that fall prevention and people monitoring, where previously you have a lot of monitors already in the hospital, but because of the remote nature, they need to look at a lot more patient at the time. So now they have the computer vision trained to look at patient that, for example, they don't want them to be leaving the bed. So now they are saying, hey, alert the nurse when this happened. When the patient is about to get off the bed, go alert the nurse. So instead of the nurse watching a tablet for like 4 or 5 patients, now they can go do about their other things and they will get alert if something were to happen. And they can now monitor more people, more patient at the same time. So, and it's like those type of workflow that like, it's not that it's not important, but it's more mundane, right? Like you really don't want, I'll say, a healthcare provider to sit there to monitoring traffic or
Yeah.
monitoring if the patient is doing what they're supposed to do, and it's automating those stuff with computer vision now.
Yeah, well, with the great resignation, we need those technologies. So it's great to hear them going out there. But what do you think's really held healthcare organizations back from making these investment in computer vision? Is it the price? Is it the vision that hadn't been fully developed? What's been holding this back? Because it seems like it's been coming for a while now.
Yeah, it has. And if you look back, like even 10 years ago, there are many of these computer vision application that was offered as a
Mhm.
solution, but many of them were lacking a couple of things. One, they were lacking the type of processing power on the edge. And much of that were, if you look at the most senior of these company that put these application on the edge, even for patient setting, they were all cloud solution. one of the problem with cloud solution, well, there's a couple of like you have like privacy concern, right? And type of thing. And you also have a bandwidth limitation. So imagine if you're trying to do that in every room, right? In a hospital, you need a lot of bandwidth to stream all of that video contents over to the cloud, get it processed, and then translate back something to view it, and making sure all of that is like blurred. A lot of the solution, they will blur the place, making sure it's just black so that you only can do some of that.
But
And
5G is
then
going to solve that, right? I thought 5G was No, you're right. I mean, the security at the edge is a good point, right? Because when it's transferring, it's another point of vulnerability, right?
yeah.
And it costs you a lot of bandwidth and expense. So yeah, no, for sure. The moving to the edge has been a good thing.
Yeah, and moving on the edge, I think that's the big change, have been on the edge, where a lot of these solutions in the past 4 or 5 years, that's where the exponential increase of that AI on the edge, that neural processing unit have been so much more powerful, and the costs have dropped so dramatically. And I think with that, you can now avoid a lot of that privacy concern, right? Like if you don't need to dump it onto cloud, you can just send the alert, right? Instead of just saying, hey, send my whole video over and record that video. You're just saying, hey, when this happened, do this, right? You can create those if and then type of policy with these type of solution.
Yeah. So is that what's really changed in the technology and the environment that people are, that made this more accessible? Is it about that nice lower cost, they're more secure, or is it also, that people are just more accepting of this type of computer vision to replace me, and they're not as afraid to be replaced? Because I heard this from one CIO. They're like, our people are fine with this technology because they're doing 3 people's jobs and they need some sort of technology to help them out. I was like, oh,
That has
changes it
huge
quite.
impact to it. I think people's comfort level with these remote technology. I mean, like you and I today, right? Doing type of remote conferencing is so much more common now. And previously, you wouldn't even consider to be trying to deploy that across the hospital. So the workflow acceptance definitely has a lot to do with it. And you're forced into that situation where you're short staffed. So what you can do, you either try the technology or, you have to go hire more nurses and you can't, right? So I think a lot of the pandemic have pushed that technology acceptance forward, like you said. But you're right. The computing power has a lot to do with it, and the data that have been correlated in the past, having that data in the past to make this inferencing model has a huge part to do with it. So for example, we partner with NVIDIA, right? So NVIDIA, they created a lot of these pre-trained models, and they have this Clara Guardian, that model, pre-trained model that allow for people to create these solutions much more quickly. Whereas before you have to hire like an army full of engineers to create them, and AI scientists.
And you got to buy the data. And
now you don't, right? You can use those pre-trained data. You can use those pre-trained model and just put the business aspect, like, hey, I want to recognize this type of event. I want to recognize this type of gesture. Like if someone's choking, I want to know about it. If someone's raising their hand, I want to know about it. Now, instead of like training the model to recognize the body, you can just use your training for those body positioning, and like, lo and behold, like just a couple of cycles of development time, you have a cutting edge AI model that you can put right onto your edge for inferencing. And in the past, when a lot of these are just coming out, everybody have to create these from scratch. And now you have a lot more of these spaces from NVIDIA, from Google, a lot of different things that allow for people to use existing building blocks on the software side, and also building block like the one that we offer to MBX for you to build these hardware solution and software solution together.
Interesting.
But the computing power, if on that scan, I think that's pretty interesting too, because we've seen the inferencing side have been invested like super like intensely by many company like NVIDIA and Intel, and many of these company are investing like your phone, for example, like one generation, you're talking about like 7 to 10 times on not on the computing part, but what you see is that everybody's investing into the AI core, right? Like, so what happens with that is that, like, for example, one generation of the Xen processor, we saw a 14 times increase in inferencing speed, right? We saw the same thing for Jessen that we use on some of our product for NVIDIA product. That we saw that was almost like 20 times increase for the same price for the last generation of
Wow.
a equivalent model if you're using an accelerator card, right? And those type of things make a huge difference because now things that was too expensive, where you have to put a server on the edge and everything where it's loud and take up a lot of power, you can fit on something that is very compact, right?
Mhm.
And you can get away with a cost model that it makes sense for you to put a card into each room, right? Whereas previously you don't want to put a whole server rack into a room, right? Like that would not
Too
be
big.
able to do, right? That infrastructure was too expensive. Where now you can do a lot more of that, and that dramatically increase, lower that cost and the ability for you to do more. And I think we see that also for the next generation too. Like we see like this progressively, not just like a doubling of speed. You see almost every generation like 6 or 7 times, 10 times
Wow.
faster. So it's
Yeah.
pretty incredible where a lot of these technology can go in the last couple of years.
Yeah, I think that's hard for most of us to understand how quickly it's changing, right? And what that means. And I don't think there's also, if I'm a CIO listening to this, I probably look at it and say, well, okay, this is all great. You're getting these efficiencies, but I've already invested in stuff like our IP-based CCTV system, spent millions rolling that out, which of course everyone needs their, TV in the room, right? And all of that, right? Like, is
Right.
there a way that you can leverage some of those investments, or does this have to be separate? How do you approach that?
Yeah, so a lot of the technology that we built, like even the building block solution, like the Corey that you see here,
Mhm.
and also the reference platform servers that we have done, is to leverage some of those
Okay.
existing. So like this one that you see, it's not a USB base; it's actually IP based camera. So you
Mm.
can use in conjunction with another IP base in a lot of these hospitals today, and we work and partner with like the leading companies that work with these IP cameras so that the APIs and the software are interoperable. So what you can do is basically take the server and the edge solution. You either just upgrade it, very simply adding those server reference platform solution, put the software on top, and suddenly you're putting that smart behind the camera. So you have these thumb camera in a lot of these rooms before. Now you can just add like this brain into it with the software, and then you can tag on different type of software AI models. So you can say, for these rooms, I'm going to do security. For these room, I'm going to do asset tracking. Maybe for these room, I want to do patient sitting. So making
Mhm.
sure they're not getting ill with that.
Yeah. No, I love it. I think, obviously COVID blew up us putting cameras in rooms, which is interesting in and of itself, right? This is the fact that we're comfortable with the camera in a room. And now we can do all sorts of things like virtual sitters and asset tracking, et cetera. So where is all this headed? Like what's next for leveraging this technology in healthcare?
So there is quite a bit that is upcoming. One of the things that we've been working on with NVIDIA is actually we're a handful of company launching the next generation of AI hardware for healthcare,
Okay.
what they consider to be MGX. So the medical side, there is a foundation package called the HoloScan for the Jessen type of product. But for that next generation, it's their first AI medical grade hardware. And we're part of that launch into launching the ORN systems.
Okay.
And many of them will be going into these edge solution that we've been talking about, where you can do a lot more. So in that generation, even the base model where you're not adding additional part, which I will talk a little bit about, where you are already doing 6 to 10 times faster than last generation,
Mhm.
very similar price point. So that allows you to do a lot more models, right? Like now, like before, you might only be able to do 1 or 2 streams, right? Now, you can imagine having 6 times more processing power. You can do a lot more streams. So
Mhm.
perhaps in multiple rooms or multiple models to be tracking at the same time. So recognition, inferencing on the edge can be a lot more complicated or at a higher fidelity than before. But the other thing that is kind of cool with ORN is the ability to add in those add-on card to be able to recognize, say, you're taking in from additional capture devices, the ability to add on a even more powerful GPU into it. That was not available on the last
Okay.
generation of Jetson product, and many of the other product you require to have a much more bigger box that you would have to do and much more expensive. But one of the things that you can also do with the Orin, which is pretty exciting, it's the software stack that's available. It's the first available to be medical grade software stack from NVIDIA that allows you to have 10 to 15 years. I think they're shooting for 15 years for the base level, which allow a lot of that opening up. So previously, a lot of these AI models, because they were progressing so fast, and a lot of these software packages on the foundation level was being upgraded at a much faster pace. Many of the medical application, you don't want to build on top of it because you have to go FDA and
I
many
was
of
going
the
to say, you got to go do
certification.
FDA clearance again. Forget that.
Yeah, so people like that's great technology and all, but I'm not going to spend all these money to certify something that you could maybe replace next year, right? So the ability to keep that base consistent is going to be huge, right, for Orin. And
Yeah.
we're one of the handful of company to offer that base solution to many customer that want to do that. So we were part of that launch when they did that this past spring, and we will be launching our Orin product this later this year and also beginning of next year for the more advanced models.
Nice. Well, and the FDA needs to improve their processes, but that's a different discussion for another day. But I think, it's interesting, like you've talked about the edge a number of times. I don't think people quite understand how valuable that is. And I'm reminded of an interview I did with NVIDIA right as COVID was starting. And they talked about a program where they were working with, I don't know, 15 to 20 hospitals around the world. And they were essentially doing the AI processing on site and then passing the findings back. And, I think that's what to me, that captured the element that was like, oh, the compliance people were like, great, our data is not leaving, just the AI learnings is leaving. And that's fine. We can share that, without worrying about HIPAA. And I think that's what the edge provides. Is that fair that, it's like you can process it there and just share the findings as needed? It's smaller, of course, you already talked about that, but it also, creates, less security risk, less HIPAA risk, et cetera. Is
That's
that right? I mean,
correct.
you've mentioned it a few times, right? So let's just highlight that.
Yeah, so one of the big changes is that you don't have to go back and forth. There's two part into that. The part I mentioned is huge for medical, right? You have HIPAA regulation, and many countries have similar type of
Sure.
regulation. And many of these a country are even more stringent than in the US in
Mm-hmm.
terms of how you keep those data, how you process those type of data, and what type of store for the patient needs.
Right.
And if you can process it right where you need it, you get that interpretation and you don't store that information, that makes a huge difference. But if you're doing it on the cloud, you have to be able to move it. You have to store it. You have to process it offsite and then bring it back with the results. But if you don't, like you can process it and actually push those information right along with your workflow, especially integration with EHR system like Epic and Cerner,
Sure.
those type of thing. You can now do that with the edge type of solution, which makes it a lot more powerful. So, and the other thing is the latency. So imagine if you're trying to work with AI and they're trying to give you interpretation of the data, but the interpretation takes like half a second or more, and the screen just lag every time you point to it. I mean, that become very frustrating to work with.
Yep.
And especially if you're trying to do large processing, that adds on even more latency. Right. And that latency, it's not just about on the cloud latency, right? You also have to talk about the infrastructure that you need, right? At the hospital, or maybe even at elderly care facility that you may not even have like those internet capability.
They might not have internet at all, but I think most of them finally have internet. Give them a shout out, No, it's so interesting, Roger. This was a great perspective, and everyone should go check out MBX Systems and see all the work you're doing. And I appreciate you taking time to give us some understanding into computer vision. And thanks everyone for watching and listening. If you want to find more great healthcare IT content like this, be sure to check it out at healthcareitdata.com or search for Healthcare IT Today on your favorite podcasting application. Thanks, Roger.
Thank you, John.